This study found that there's a greater hazard ratio and a greater risk and a greater association with a 5-year loss of muscle than compared to the associated increased risk with having a heart attack or a cardiovascular event with changes in fat mass, gain in fat mass. They say specifically, compared with participants with stable fat mass percentage, those with a fat gain more than 2% over a 5-year period had an increased risk for a future cardiovascular event, and the hazard ratio was 2.7%. In contrast, they say fat-free mass loss greater than 8%, fat-free mass would be muscle tissue. So if people lose more than 8% of their muscle tissue over the course of a 5-year period, this was associated with a higher risk of cardiovascular events. Their hazard ratio was almost double that compared to the fat gain. It was 3.83, which means that you're about 300% more likely to have a heart attack if you start losing muscle between the ages of 50 and 80. As you get older, you should focus on resistance training. You should work on lifting weights. Cardio is good, but a lot of people do cardio at the expense of not having time or energy to lift weights. And that's kind of the thesis of this paper and supporting the health of muscle. You know, we've been focusing so much on fat and the problems with body fat. I'm guilty of this, talking about how fat tissue is a metabolically active organ. It releases adipocytokines and all this stuff. But muscle is a metabolically protective organ, releasing protective myokines. Why aren't we focusing on supporting muscle? And so Gabrielle has really been leading the charge with that. The scientists say that BMI is not accurate. So we should be looking at lean tissue, fat-free mass, muscle tissue, and looking at body fat percentage, not just BMI. And so they say a loss of free fat mass less than 8% was related to a 2.8-fold higher risk of cardiovascular events compared with the stable group. So the people that lifted weights, that exercised regularly, that ate sufficient proteins to support muscle protein synthesis, and didn't lose more than 8% muscle tissue, they still had an increased risk of developing a heart attack, but it was much lower compared to those who did lose more than 8% of their free fat mass or muscle tissue over the course of the study period, and so forth. So our findings imply that one possible reason for the negative effect of weight loss on cardiovascular disease in some research studies might be due to the loss of muscle tissue and muscle mass more than the loss of fat mass. Really important, because a lot of people will diet hard, will cut calories, will do 3, 4, 5-day fasts all the time and lose muscle mass. And as some studies have found, when people lose weight, it actually might increase their risk of a cardiovascular event. And that perplexed scientists for a long time. Well, how could that be? They're losing fat. How could they possibly increase their risk? Well, if that weight loss included loss of lean muscle tissue, that could increase their risk of having a heart attack. And the scientists say, more importantly, it has been demonstrated that total muscle mass peaks at the age of 24 years old. Afterward, muscle mass is maintained as about 10% loss occurs between the years 24 and 50. However, between the years 50 and 80, an additional 30% loss occurs. So if you're between that age category, 50 years old, between 50 and 80, you should be prioritizing protein. You should be prioritizing lifting weights, resistance training, and then icing on the cake would be the cardiovascular aerobic type training, but focus on resistance training. Lean muscle is now independently associated with all-cause mortality, poor COVID outcomes, and now we have cardiovascular disease, the number one leading cause of mortality.
DoctorsToTrust.com, the world's #1 site for short annotated nutrition videos, 100% free.